Hi, welcome to Basic Math. Today we are going to be looking at proportions, and so before we can do that we have to talk first about something that is a really pretty basic skill for us, or a really necessary skill, especially if you go on into doing any algebra. We need to talk about solving an equation by dividing. And so we haven't done really anything probably at this point with equations, but basically an equation is something like this: 3x is equal to 12. And the goal is usually to figure out what number you can put in there for x that would make the whole thing work. Now, undoubtedly, some of you are just looking at that and going, well, it's got to be 4, right? 3 times 4 is 12. And that's great, but what we want is a technique so that if we get to harder looking problems, like, oh, I don't know, say this one, 3/4 times n is equal to 8/9, that then when it gets just a little bit harder, we'll still be able to solve them. Okay, so hang with me here for just a minute while we go through how to do this solving by dividing, because it's really pretty straightforward and it's going to get us where we want to go. So to do this, all we have to do first is recognize that what we do actually have here is multiplication. Anytime you have a number and a letter smashed up against each other, it is the same as if there's a multiplication sign in between. Okay, it is multiplication. So what's the opposite of multiplying? Dividing. So if we want to get rid of this multiplication, we're just going to divide by 3. But if you take a class in algebra, and hopefully you will someday, you'll find out that you're only allowed to do that to the left-hand side if you also do it to the right. So since we divided that left-hand side by 3, we have to also divide the right-hand side by 3, and that gives us our 4, because 12 divided by 3 is 4. So we use the division to get rid of the multiplication, but we have to do it on both sides. And as long as the numbers are nice like that, 3x is equal to 12, it's pretty straightforward and really not too bad. It gets a little bit more interesting when we throw decimals or fractions into the mix. So here I have one of each. The decimal one isn't too bad, and the big reason is you can still use a calculator. The process is exactly the same. We're going to divide both sides by 0.5. On the left, that makes the 0.5s go away. And on the right, if you do your division, 10 divided by 0.5 is going to end up being 20. And like I said, you can use a calculator to do that. And so decimals really shouldn't be all that scary. They just look worse than the regular numbers. Okay, so same process. Last but not least, in this little piece on learning how to solve by dividing, what if you have fractions? Well, you're going to do the same thing, but it's going to get messier. So we're going to divide both sides here by 3/4. On the left, that makes it go away, but on the right, we now have a division problem with fractions. Okay, and that's okay. So I'm just going to kind of come out here to the side, and I'm going to do a little bit of scratch work. Okay. Do yourself a favor, always take scratch work off to the side with these. You don't want to do it in the middle of the problem. It's going to make a mess. So all I have is 8/9, and it's divided by 3/4. Okay, I can rewrite it with a division symbol instead of the big fraction bar in between two fractions. And when we divide fractions, we of course take the second fraction, flip it upside down, and we turn it into a multiplication problem. Now we can multiply straight across. Nothing is going to reduce. 8 times 4 gives me 32 for the top, and 9 times 3 gives me 27 on the bottom. So you can see that's a pretty nasty looking answer. It's definitely a pretty nasty answer, but it works, and there we go. So that's how you solve by dividing. You have the easy ones, the decimals, which are really basically the same thing, and then definitely the nastier ones with the fractions. So let's get to those proportions. Alright, so now for the proportions. I'm going to need another board to give you some more examples. I've got one kind of hiding here behind me. We'll get to that in just a second. So for proportions, we're going to do two things. We're going to cross multiply, and then we're going to divide. So what is a proportion? Well, oh, you can't even see my equal sign. I put lines through it. Let's try that, make it look a little better. There we go. Proportion is two fractions connected by an equal sign. Basically, it's two ratios that are equal, but with one piece missing. Okay, and so the goal is to find that missing piece in the proportion, to find what out of 10 would be the same as 30 out of 50. So again, this one's not too bad. You might be able to figure this one out just by kind of figuring it in your head, but we have a process. So we're going to start by doing what's called cross multiplying. I'm going to take the x times the 50, and that gives me 50x, and I'm going to take the 10 times the 30. That's where we get the name from, the cross multiplying. We're making an x out of our multiplication here. This only works when you have an equal sign in the middle. 10 times 30 is 300. So now, and you can see I finished it, but now we have an equation just like the ones we were just looking at. We have 50 times x is equal to 300, so I divide by 50, which gets rid of the 50 on the left, and when we do the division, we get 6. So what that tells us is that a ratio of 6 over 10 is the same as the ratio of 30 over 50. All right, let's clear the board and do maybe one or two more examples. All right, I have two more examples, one with decimals and one with some fractions, because we all need the practice. All right, so here's my first one. 0.3 over y is equal to 2.1 over 6.3. So I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to cross multiply. So y times 2.1 gives me the 2.1 times y. And 0.3 times 6.3, using my calculator, gives me 1.89. All that's left is to divide both sides by that 2.1 so that we can get the y by itself. 1.89 divided by 2.1 is 0.9. One thing to watch out for here, if you are using a calculator, the top number always gets typed into your calculator first. Okay, so type in 1.89 divided by 2.1. If you do it the other way, your division's backwards, and you're going to get a really messy, nasty looking ant. Well, in this case, yeah, it wouldn't be great. Don't do that. And now my last example. This one's a disaster. It's got fractions, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So buckle up, and here we go. I've set the ratio of 7 over 9 is equal to the ratio of 3/5 over n. Oh, look at that, a fraction in the middle of all this mess. So I start it the same way. I cross multiply. So let me mark that in. 7 times n is 7n. That's the easy one. The other one is 9 times 3/5. Now you can see I got 27 over 5. But again, I mentioned this earlier in the video. If you have scratch work to do, take it off to the side. So I did. I did 9 times 3/5. Notice I put the 9 over 1. 9 times 3 gives me 27. 1 times 5 gives me 5. And that's where this 27 over 5 came from. So then I divide both sides by 7, which makes the 7's drop out. And more scratch work off to the side. 27 over 5. Remember, dividing by 7 is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal, upside down. So times 1/7. 27 times 1, 5 times 7 is 35. And there's our answer, 27 over 35. So there you go. That's proportions. In some coming videos, we're going to look and see some applications of these. But that's the process that we're going to be looking at. Okay, over and over and over again. So good luck.